7th, 2022 meeting of the Hudson River Park Trust Board of Directors. Due to the coronavirus pandemic and consistent with the legislation signed by Governor Hochul on January 14th, 2022, that allows for virtual meetings under the open meetings law during the COVID-19 state of emergency. This meeting is being held remotely via Zoom, enabling the general public to listen to the meeting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be posted on the Trust's website, and a stenographer is providing a transcript of the meeting. The directors have received the agenda materials in advance of this meeting and are free to ask questions or comment at any time on the action items submitted for approval today. Please note, however, that comments or questions from the audience will not be entertained at this meeting. I note that board memos and the resolutions from today's meeting on today's agenda have been posted on the Trust website in a link entitled Board Meetings, Bylaws, and Other Materials under Board Agendas and Minutes, and thus are available to the public. So there are 9 items on our consent agenda for our meeting today. First, approval of minutes and ratification of the actions taken in the December 2nd, 2021 meeting of the Hudson River Park Trust Board of Directors. 2, authorization to extend the term of contract with High Road Press, LLC for print production and mailing services. 3, authorization to extend the term of contract for alternate power solutions for Pier 40 emergency generator maintenance and repair services. 4, authorization to extend the term of contract with County Fire, Inc. for fire alarm system inspection, maintenance, and repair services. 5, authorization to extend the term of contract with Wicks Arborists for tree maintenance services. 6, authorization to extend the term of contract with Stantec Consulting Services for owner's rep for capital projects and strategic planning. 7th, authorization to amend the contract with Peter J. Contanzaro, Inc. for on-call electrical services for Pier 40 sports perimeter lighting replacement. 8, authorization to amend the contract with the New York State Office of General Services for Pier 55 code compliance review services. And finally, and 9th, authorization to approve amendments to the Audit Committee, Finance Committee, and Governance Committee charters. So unless anybody has any comments, I will now call for a motion to approve all of the items on the consent agenda. So moved, Pam, thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? The motion is approved. Patrick, did you want to say anything? Did I get to? Okay. All right, perfect. So the motion is approved with 1 dissent. The first corporate action on the agenda before the board is a request for authorization to contract with Deborah Bradley for the Pier 84 dog run restoration. So let me turn to Ms. Doyle.
Thank you. The dog run at Pier 84 has been a popular amenity since its opening in October 2006. The asphalt paving surface has weathered over the years and is currently in need of replacement. The restoration work involves replacing the paving surface, making modifications to the existing fencing, and installing a permanent canine water feature and additional benches. Designs have previously been shared with Community Board 4's Waterfront Parks and Environment Committee, and of course also with the board. In addition, in accordance with its procurement guidelines, the Trust issued a request for proposals for Pier 84 dog run restoration for the period between November 15th and October 13th, 2021, and received 3 proposals on the submission deadline. A selection committee comprised of Trust staff reviewed the submissions and evaluated each according to the selection criteria in the RFP. The selection committee identified Deborah Bradley Construction and Management Services as the highest ranked proposer, which also offered the lowest fee proposal. Deborah Bradley is a New York State certified MWBE and has successfully completed several projects for the Trust, including the Leroy Street Dog Run and Chelsea Waterside Park Playground reconstruction. The trust requests authorization by the Board of Directors to contract with Deborah Bradley Construction and Management Services, Inc. for Pier 84 Dog Run restoration in the amount of $623,682, plus a 10% contingency for a total board authorization amount of up to $686,050. Funding is available from the capital maintenance portion of the trust annual operating budget, including contributions by City Council and Manhattan Borough President.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, I will call for a motion for authorization to contract with Deborah Bradley Construction and Management Services, Inc. for Pier 84 Dog Run restoration. Do I have a
So
motion?
moved.
Thank you, Pam. A second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion is approved. And I realize, Noreen, unless you were going to introduce him, we should welcome Robert Atterbury, who is new on the screen in our
We
board.
have Robert Atterbury and Rob Rodriguez, and they're both going to have a chance to say a few words in the following the business matters. So thank you, though, for
Of course.
noticing.
Oh, and I see Rob Rodriguez now on the screen. Thank you.
Yes.
So
Also,
welcome.
I just want to flag that depending on who was recorded as the possible dissent, I'm not sure if there was, I just received a note that it's not clear that there was a dissent on the consent agenda. Do you want to, Chris, I'm looking at you, do we want clarity on that for some reason?
I didn't see a dissent, Vicky. I think that was a mistake. I didn't see anybody dissent on the consent agenda.
Okay, was there a dissent or can we? No, okay, my apologies.
I think Lowell came on late, so I'll note that Lowell joined the meeting after the consent
I
agenda.
joined after that, but I would have voted for the consent agenda had I been here on time.
Thank you and welcome, Lowell. Sorry about that, Patrick. I saw your hand up. Okay. All right. The second corporate action item before the board is authorization to contract with the Bureau Veritas North America for park-wide materials testing services. So Ms. Doyle?
Park-wide inspection and testing services are needed to support many ongoing construction activities in Hudson River Park. Required services include quality control inspections and completing technical paperwork for the New York City Department of Buildings. The trust issued an RFP for park-wide inspection and testing services on December 15th and received 8 proposals on the January 11th submission deadline. A selection committee comprised of trust staff evaluated the submissions according to the selection criteria in the RFP and then interviewed the two top-ranked firms. Trust staff has identified Bureau Veritas North America, Inc. as the highest ranked proposer, which also offered the lowest fees for the most commonly used tests. Bureau Veritas has successfully completed inspection contracts for the New York City Economic Development Corporation and Department of Design and Construction, the New York State Thruway Authority, and the Port Authority. Funding for the construction inspections would be part of individual project budgets with funding made available by New York State or City, restricted funds from the sale of air rights, private sources, or reserve funds of the trust as included in adopted trust budgets. Staff therefore requests authorization by the Board of Directors to enter into a contract with Bureau Veritas North America, Inc. for park-wide inspection and testing services in the amount of $1 million for a 3-year contract term.
Are there any questions or comments? If not, I will call for a motion for authorization to contract with the Bureau Veritas North America, Inc. for park-wide materials testing services. Do I have a motion? Pam, thank you. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Lowell. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion is approved. The third corporate action before the board is a request to adopt the 2022 procurement guidelines. Please, Ms. Doyle.
Trust staff reviews the procurement guidelines periodically to ensure they accurately reflect current New York State policies and requirements. For 2022, staff recommends updating the guidelines to clarify the wording regarding certain procedures that the trust already follows for procurements. First, the proposed language clarifies the language regarding a failed request for proposal. Generally, a failed RFP occurs when the trust does not receive a minimum of 2 proposals in response to its RFP. Under the proposed language, the trust can continue to treat the response as a single or sole source procurement, subject to adhering to the already existing procedures for single or sole source procurements. Second, the proposed guidelines clarify procedures for the submission of proposals electronically by explaining that once a member of the selection committee opens a proposal that was submitted electronically, such as one received by email, it is deemed open by the trust. The directors have all received a copy of the procurement guidelines track to show these minor changes. Staff requests board approval of the 2022 procurement guidelines.
Okay, any questions or comments?
One question. So in other words, if you get only one or even just 2, that doesn't mean you have to cancel and start over. You just roll it over into a sole source?
We may consider having it be a sole source. We do not have to. So we would assess, so if we only got one, which is a failed RFP, we would consider whether we would call it a failed RFP and then would consider whether it meets the criterion for a single or sole source procurement, which has a number of standards that you've seen in the procurement guidelines.
Gotcha.
So enables but doesn't require.
Correct.
Any other questions or concerns? Okay, if not, I will call for a motion for adoption of the 2022 procurement guidelines.
So moved.
Rose and Lowell, thank you. First and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay, the motion is approved. The
Madam
fourth-
Chair, before you start or introduce the next action item,
Mhm.
there's another description I'd like to provide related to the procurement guidelines.
Okay,
That isn't a business item, but is something we wanted to raise.
okay, please.
So we'd like to point out that the previously adopted 2020 procurement guidelines allow the trust to use its discretionary procurement procedures to award contracts of up to $500,000 to certified MWBE or service disabled veterans SDVOB businesses consistent with the updated state finance law. Discretionary procurements still require the trust to obtain competitive pricing, in this case, at least 3 quotes, but state finance law no longer requires formal competitive advertisement processes for discretionary procurements below the $500,000 price threshold. In order to procure with this method, the trust would still need to publish a notice in the state contract reporter for any procurement above $50,000, stating that the trust is utilizing its discretionary procurement procedures to award a contract to an MWBE or SDVOB entity. Staff has continued to rely on full competitive procurements to date, but has simultaneously been considering the degree to which it could be beneficial at times to use these permitted discretionary procurement procedures in certain instances. We've come to the conclusion that in certain instances, the burdens of responding to full competitive RFPs may deter some small businesses from responding, and this may actually have the effect of diminishing our ability to attract a diverse pool of MWBEs and SDVOBs for certain of our procurements. Thus, we are planning to experiment with discretionary procurement for certain procurements between $50,000 and $500,000 when we can get at least 4 quotes from qualified MWBEs and SDVOB primes. Some work would continue to be procured via traditional competitive procurement, but we believe the flexibility would allow us to attract some additional MWBE and SDVOB firms to provide some smaller services, like inspections of fire extinguishers and alarms, printing services, or hiring small production services. We certainly welcome any feedback from the directors if anyone disagrees with this approach. As we've said, we've had this ability for some time based on state finance law. We haven't used it yet. This is our recommendation.
Okay, any comments? Rose?
I would really endorse that. In fact, my question was, for the first is, can we do more? It really holds up. It discourages small businesses. Doesn't necessarily get you the best contractor, in fact, often the worst. So I really, really support it, and I hope you use it.
And
Thank
I
you.
second that. I completely agree with Rose on that.
Likewise, I think it's terrific.
Noreen, do you encourage on your larger contracts for the contractors to get subcontractors that are
Very much so. And in fact, we have a very, very good track record of getting it at generally exceeding 30% overall over the course of any given year for MWBEs. The SDVOB program is a lot newer. And they're still building the capacity of that program. And we frankly are still building our capacity with that program. And we think this is an opportunity. We're generally quite good with MWBEs, and you see periodically we're identifying them as primes, often as subs, often over 30%. But SDVOBs is a work in progress.
Okay, any other questions or comments about that?
Can I add one more thing? Are you able, so when you do your outreach for the 4, you can then weigh what's most important. For instance, it's not necessarily lowest bidder, it's also qualifications, references, and all of that, right? You do your own
Due diligence, yeah. So the park is fortunate. We do not have to do lowest bidder the way many agencies have to do. We already have lowest qualified bidder, which is really a benefit.
Yes.
But yeah, it's never just price.
Good.
Someone has to be qualified too.
Okay, that takes us to the 4th corporate action on the agenda, which is the request to approve the trust monument policy. Ms. Doyle.
Thank you. The trust has identified the need to establish guidance for consideration of future requests for the installation of physical elements in Hudson River Park intended to honor, commemorate, or memorialize people or events. The state and city parks departments both have such policies already in effect. Staff has reviewed these policies and has consulted with several board members to prepare the proposed monument policy now before the board. The proposed monument policy distinguishes between monuments and commemorations. Monuments, which generally take the form of public art or sculpture, are considered large-scale permanent installations that either occupy a large park footprint or could create a change to surrounding park use as monuments. As further detailed in the proposed policy, in reviewing proposals for monuments, the trust would be required to consider such factors as its appropriateness and relevance to the setting, compatibility with the surrounding park, impact on park use, aesthetics, permanence, the amount of maintenance that a monument or its surrounding area will require, and the associated cost of such maintenance, and community input. Any installation of a monument would require approval by the board after engagement with the public. Commemorations are generally defined as small branded plaques installed at benches, trees, gardens, and other park locations. The policy would allow these to be installed without approval by the trust board, provided that any proposed commemoration is generally consistent with the existing park design guidelines, neither requires nor causes changes to park use in the area of the installation, does not require significant maintenance, and does not pose a significant financial burden to the trust. A copy of the proposed monument policy was previously circulated to and discussed with the board's governance committee, and the policy has been shared with all directors. Staff therefore requests that the board approve the Hudson River Park monument policy dated January 2022.
Questions or comments?
Hey, this is Eric. I just want to say it was a pleasure serving on this committee, and I think it's great to see this happening. So both formalizing it, but also thinking more broadly about interpretation of the park. It was a pleasure to be part of this effort.
Ditto.
Yeah, well, thank you to everyone who was on the committee. I know from my time with the city that monuments can be very controversial, to put it mildly. So, great to, I think, have this guidance, and thanks to all of you. Any questions or comments, Sarah?
Yeah, hi. And likewise, I really appreciated being part of the conversations that I was in about this. I think it was really, really interesting and helpful. My only flag that I'm seeing reviewing the final document is in number 4 in aesthetics. I worry that, okay, say there's an instance where there's somebody proposing something, and especially the sentence where it says works of inferior workmanship will not be approved. And I worry because some of these are pretty subjective categories. And I wonder if there's a little bit of a danger zone as far as having kind of an accidental conflict that would come up over some of like an aesthetic matter. And maybe my suggestion would just be to bolster the role of the design committee in making that determination, so that there's sort of a built-in level of authority within the trust board that's sort of deemed responsible for aesthetic matters that might support that one. Any thoughts on that from other folks?
I do think that the inferior workmanship language may have come from city parks. In fact, perhaps not in your monument policy, but in some aspect of how something related to art proposals, perhaps for the city parks are concerned, because I believe that language came from one of our attorneys who formerly worked for city parks. Chris or Nicole Coutinho, do you know if I'm speaking correctly there?
We would have to look it up where the source is. Yeah, we'd have to look it up. I can't tell you right now.
Regardless, though, I hear your point, and certainly I think the design committee of the board is an appropriate arbiter of such consideration.
That language comes directly from NYC Parks considerations on aesthetics.
Okay.
I'm just noting that is funny that I'm the one who's raising it, so acknowledging that, thank you. So I don't know if again, I think my point is still relevant, that there might just want to be some internal way to say that the board has sort of given itself the authority to determine what is or is not that appropriate level of workmanship, just because I feel like that could become an issue.
Any objections to that, Pam?
Sorry, I had to plug my computer in, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but I think we want to still, I totally get that they're subjective, but I think that's kind of the point of some of our guidelines, is that we want the opportunity to decide what goes in the park for aesthetics and certainly for workmanship, especially if we have to maintain it on some level. I mean, I know that's also one of the factors, but I wouldn't be apologetic about saying that we want to judge something on aesthetics.
And I completely agree. And I think to that point, adding in a board level of authority over that matter will sort of strengthen this whole section 4, I guess is what I'm suggesting, so that someone can't say, well, why are you the ones to decide, right? We would say, well,
I got you.
The board design committee is the decider here.
Right.
So any objections to that?
No, it's a good suggestion.
Commissioner Colosade, any?
Nope, I'm good with the change. It's obviously it's all as you said, it's a fudge area, but if it provides further clarity, sure, happy to go with that. Yep.
I apologize, but I have somehow missed this whole endeavor, and for no other reason but the fact that I haven't looked at it, I'm going to abstain from any vote on this one. So sorry about that. I should have read it, but I didn't. So.
We understand everybody's busy. Okay, so then can I have a motion to approve the Hudson River Trust Monument Policy dated January 2022 with the amendment suggested by Sarah Nielsen about submitting any questions about aesthetics to the board's design committee.
So moved as stated.
I'm sorry?
I said I move it as you stated it, Madam
Okay.
Chair.
I think, okay. And a second, Pam? Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions?
Yeah.
Purnima. Okay, perfect. The motion is approved. Okay, so that completes the board action items for approval today. And I would now like to ask Ms. Doyle to present the president's report.
Thank you. I'll begin with the preliminary budget for fiscal year 22-23, which will begin on April 1st. Our Chief Financial Officer, Kim Quinones, and Vice President of Finance, Sikander Zuberi, presented the preliminary budget to the Finance and Investment Committee this past Monday, and the preliminary budget has been shared with all directors. I'd like to invite Kim to provide a brief overview as well as an update on our financial status through the first 9 months of the current fiscal year. Kim?
Great, thanks, Noreen. As Noreen mentioned, we chatted about this earlier this week, and the proposed budget contains projected results for FY22, a year-over-year comparison of the proposed FY23 and the adopted FY22 budget. This proposed budget will be posted at multiple locations throughout the park in accordance with state regulations and also in the lobby of our building and on our website. We will then come back to the board at the March meeting with the final proposed budget for an official vote at that time. So let's look at the current year projected results. Total revenues are currently projected to be substantially higher than the very conservative budget adopted in March 2021 due to a combination of a stronger than expected recovery from COVID-related business disruptions over the past year, plus increased income from parking and fees. For perspective, it's important to remember that this budget was prepared 1 year ago when vaccines were not yet widely available and the prospects for reopening were really not known. So while all this is good news, these revenues are not yet at pre-pandemic levels, which we look at as being FY20, which was the last full year of operation before COVID hit. So along with lower revenues being budgeted for 22, the budget also substantially reduced discretionary spending as compared to FY20, including for many of our public programs. Actual spending on part-time and seasonals was also reduced from budgeted amounts. Now, an operating surplus is projected for the current year as opposed to the budgeted FY22 operating deficit of 3.5 million. So what's in the FY23 budget proposal? Given our experience this past year, the budget proposal is cautiously optimistic with planning for in-person programming and maintaining the high standards of park maintenance enjoyed by our visitors. Total revenues for FY23 are budgeted at 35 million, while total operating expenses are pegged at 28.2 million, generating a modest operating surplus prior to unreimbursed expenditures for capital maintenance and equipment. With the inclusion of these costs, the trust would once again rely on reserves to fund any operating deficit, which is currently proposed to be budgeted at 3.16 million. So that's as opposed to the budgeted prior year of 3.5 million. I also want to call to your attention that once again, insurance costs and premiums have risen, and they're now 21% of our expense budget, excluding capital maintenance, or 17% including it. So while the state and city do reimburse the trust for most of these expenses, the efforts to keep that insurance premium low are resulting in insurance matters increasingly being a large part of our staff time. I also want to say something about Q3 results, because that was also, the financials were also included in your packet. Operating revenues now total 28 million, and operating expenses after reimbursement were at 16 million. And once construction, capital maintenance, and reimbursements are factored in, we had a surplus of 7.5 million at the end of Q3. So strong now. We're expecting a little bit more spending in the next quarter for proposed year-end results. I'll turn it back to you, Noreen.
Thanks, Kim, and thank you once again to you and to Sikander for steering us through this phase of our budgeting process. I think you all know that the March board meeting gets the full-on, very robust presentation of the proposed final budget for your consideration. So this is really an FYI at this point. And also, just for the benefit of the directors who are not part of the Finance and Investment Committee meeting, there were some general questions raised about Pier 40 in particular, generated by the projected increases to parking revenue now that the trust has just opened another roof section and has reintroduced parking in that zone. And just to let you know, staff is in the midst of assessing some technical issues related to yet another anticipated roof repair or need at Pier 40. We expect to return to you with some recommendations along with some other updates on the infrastructure work that's been happening at Pier 40. And then sometime next year, I think it'll be time for us to resume some of those macro conversations that we had about the park and revenue and how do we make sure that we can sustain ourselves into the long term. You'll recall we were interrupted from those discussions because of the onset of COVID. And at some point we need to return to those kinds of big picture conversations. Director Kaplan, do you have anything that you want to add as the chair of the committee, or do any other members who were part of this discussion want to add anything at this point?
No, I think I would have added the thing about the parking, but you did. So.
Okay. So getting back to the beginning of the meeting, as you know, we recently completed the search process for our 2 senior new leadership positions at the trust. Both Rob Rodriguez and Robert Atterbury started on January 3rd, and they've both hit the ground running. I have to say it's been incredibly wonderful to have 2 people with so much knowledge of parks and our community issues join our team and become part of our brain trust. Rob Rodriguez is our EVP of Park Management. His portfolio encompasses planning, management, and oversight related to the care, maintenance, and repair of physical assets, including landscape, grounds and buildings, events supported and logistics, and public safety. And Robert Atterbury is our new EVP of Park Relationships and Programs. He'll supervise programs, initiatives, and external relationships that support the park's engagement with the community. Along with other members of our team, Rob and Robert both attended last week's advisory council meeting and were both welcomed warmly. And now I'd like to give them both a chance to introduce themselves to you personally. Robert Atterbury, would you like to begin?
Hi, sure. So thank you to Noreen for that level of introductions, and thank you all for the welcome here. There are many faces of folks I already know. If we haven't met yet, I look forward to getting to meet you all in person someday soon. Just a little bit about myself. So I'm coming over here after a 7-year stint with Congressman Jerry Nadler, who covers the entirety of the park on the west side. I was a deputy district director for community relations. Sort of on the west side. Before that, I worked for State Senator Brett Hoylman and State Senator Tom Twain. So I have sort of a long history on the west side, working with our west side communities here. I've gotten the chance to really work on a number of major projects, from sort of spearheading this effort to designate the Stonewall National Monument, to Port Authority Bus Terminal, Penn Station, to an effort to help renovate NYCHA developments in Chelsea. I've really gotten to do a number of very large, complicated community projects. So I'm thrilled to be able to bring some of that knowledge and history with our communities to the park. I'm personally thrilled to be able to work for a park. It's really long been a dream of mine. I am deeply involved in city parks. I actually founded and run a community garden in Brooklyn. It's what I do in my off time, is work in parks and park programming. It's my deep passion of mine. And the Hudson River Park is really such a gem and icon within New York City that I'm thrilled to be able to help support it and really get to engage with the folks who use the park and who use our services and our programs. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Rob Rodriguez, your turn.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, directors. Very happy to be part of the team here at Hudson River Park Trust. The park is an absolute gem of a public resource to the people of New York and beyond. And I say beyond because I'm actually from New Jersey. I was born in Hoboken and grew up in Jersey City. And I spent the last 16 years working for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Spent the first 5 years or so working with the Green Acres program, specifically dealing with parks and recreation compliance issues, based out of Trenton, the state capital, and then transferred over to the Division of Parks and Forestry, spent a year managing a 40,000 acre forest in the Pine Barrens, camping, trails, historic villages, that traditional state park feel and look. And then I transferred to my hometown in Jersey City and spent the last 10 years managing Liberty State Park, which very similar in a lot of ways to Hudson River Park, except it's obviously Manhattan and it's very urban in its layout, and there's a lot of tenants scattered throughout. But in terms of physical assets, public use, programming, it's all very similar language that I'm used to. It's just a very, very different geography. But growing up in Jersey City, I got to see this park being built. I know what it looked like in the 80s and in the 90s. And so to see what it's transformed into and what will continue to happen is just really, it's incredible, actually. So what's happening here. And so to be part of this team is very exciting. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I've spent my whole career in parks as a public servant. So this is just a continuation of that. And I very much look forward to working with each of you.
So one of Rob's big adjustments is needing to say that the river is on the west side because
Yeah.
he's used to it being on the east side. We learned that today.
Yeah.
Bank. He's a right banker now.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm sure you're getting a feeling for how fortunate I feel to be able to welcome Rob and Robert, and of course also Kim, to our trust family. And I'll add that in future meetings, as time allows, I'd like to start giving other members of our staff some microphone time as well. I think the park is all of us, and it's good for you to get to know other people here as well. I'll keep moving unless anyone needs to say anything or wants to say anything right now.
Welcome, welcome.
Great. So I'll provide the usual update on some of our design and construction activities next. Construction is proceeding well at Chelsea Waterside Park. Our groundbreaking and thank you celebration on December 3rd marked the start of the long-awaited comfort station. It was a chilly but happy day where we gathered with community advocates and many of you from the Chelsea Waterside Park Association, Community Board 4, and our advisory council to celebrate the many improvements to Chelsea Waterside that will be part of the Phase 2 improvements that have been approved by the board. Aside from the new comfort station, Phase 2 includes an expanded dog run with separate areas for small and larger dogs, a refreshed sports field, a permanent picnic area, and many more planted areas. Construction on the central area, overlook, and south edge of the athletic field has been underway for some months. Last week, we closed the dog run so that we could begin the subsurface work needed to create the new water features and other improvements. We know that closing park amenities that our communities rely on, such as dog runs, playgrounds, sports fields, and courts, always causes pain, and we do our best to plan the closures to create the least amount of disruption whenever possible. In this case, the Chelsea Waterside Dog Run, work started on the expanded dog run area before closing the current dog run, and timing the closure to begin in the dead of winter when the dog run is a bit less busy than usual was very intentional. When the dog run reopens in early summer, it will have nearly doubled in size, and we are sure that it will bring happiness to many dogs and their owners. In advance of closing the Chelsea Waterside Park field sometime in the summer, our Public Programs Department has begun working on ways to accommodate as many sports field permittees as possible at other park locations. With respect to other construction at the Gansevoort Peninsula, construction continues to proceed, including on the sports field, the 13th Avenue Promenade, and subsurface utilities. At Pier 97, the contractor is installing rebar and formwork for various concrete elements, including the north edge retaining walls, shade structure footings, and light pole foundations. Offsite fabrication of the Pier 97 shade structures is well underway and is expected to be completed at the end of February, after which the structures will be shipped and delivered to Pier 97 sometime this spring. The contractors have started preparing construction schedules and submittal packages for the Pier 97 Park Building, and the design team is working on a construction documents package for the Esplanade and Bikeway restoration work to be located from Pier 97 to Pier 99, and that will connect into Riverside Park South. The project will be partially funded by a Transportation Alternatives Program grant, so we're working closely with State Department of Transportation on this effort. The south roof parking lot at Pier 40 is completed and is open for parking, adding back approximately 350 spaces combined between the roof area and the area below it that were previously closed. Fencing around the rooftop passive field is almost complete, and the turf will be installed once weather cooperates. Thanks to Hudson River Park Friends, funding was secured for the science play area in Tribeca, and staff is working with the design team to have final construction documents ready this spring, after which the trust will issue a construction RFP with the goal of starting the science play area construction later in 2022. The trust released an RFP for estuarium design services on January 6, 2022, with proposals due March 4th. The estuarium is a long planned component of the park, and we've pursued many paths over the years to try to secure all of the funding needed for it. While we're not there yet, the planning work funded by DEC last year to consider the unique mechanical and operating needs for the Aquaria tanks planned to support Hudson River fish set the stage for the current RFP. And restricted funding for this design is also available to us thanks to DEC. I've begun conversations with New York State and New York City about this important project, which is also a priority in our adopted estuarine sanctuary management plan. And our hope is that advancing the design for this building will accelerate identifying the balance of the funding needed for this important environmental research and education facility. Are there any questions on any of the design and construction activities? Okay. The Parks River project is getting ready to kick off the 2022 education season with a series of winter field trips. Starting this month, schools from all over New York City can sign up for virtual field trips focused on local fish populations, plankton ecology, environmental justice, and plastic pollution through the Trust website. A selection of virtual field trips will be available through the end of the school year. We're also expecting to offer some in-person field trips for schools from April through the end of 2022 school year, subject to COVID restrictions. The River Project is very excited to be hosting its first ever education open house virtually on March 22nd. The target audience includes school administrators, educators, and after-school program leaders. We've reached out to our advisory council, community boards, and elected officials to promote it, and will continue doing so. At the virtual open house, River Project educators will share information about 2022 programming opportunities and our free digital learning resources, such as the STEM activity of the week. We want schools from all across New York City to be able to take full advantage of all we have to offer. 2 weeks ago, the Trust hosted its first annual research and habitat enhancement meeting for scientists and environmental partners to fulfill a commitment made in the Estuarine Sanctuary Management Plan. Science partners from SUNY Stony Brook, Columbia University, New Jersey City University, and the Hudson River Foundation joined us in providing updates on active research initiatives occurring in the sanctuary. Partners like DEC, Riverkeeper, HEP, CUNY, Billion Oyster Project, and more help the Trust consider ideas for next steps in research projects and also discuss the development of a visiting science program. The Trust is also planning to schedule our annual full Technical Advisory Committee meeting in March 2022. The Trust Public Programs Department is finishing the program schedule for 2022 as well. Many favorites will return in person in the park, including the Hudson River Dance Festival in June, Sunset on the Hudson's Friday night music performances, and Hudson River Kids Entertainment. The Blues Barbecue Festival will be back, especially for Lowell Kern, and Submerged Marine Science Festival will also be back in person, two highlights of the busy programming season. Are there any questions on River Project or public programs? As noted a bit earlier, the Trust filed its annual MWBE and SDVOB plans with Empire State Development and Office of General Services, respectively, last week. The board should be aware of the hard work by many of our staff that goes into implementing these programs, including Sean Singh, who was the lead in preparing the two annual plans. The trust takes seriously its commitments to diversify our procurement pool and to provide opportunities for MWBE and SDVOB businesses. And finally, I want to address the contemplated new Chelsea Piers lease that continues its negotiation process. Chelsea Piers principals and trust staff provided an update on the need for and benefits of entering into a new lease at this time, rather than waiting until the current lease expires 22 years from now at last week's advisory council meeting. The trust expects to attend upcoming meetings of both Community Board 4 and the Advisory Council to provide more details, potentially in concert with the start of a formal significant action public review process. We believe that we are very close to finalizing the terms of the proposed lease and that it provides substantial benefits for the park. Along with requirements for improvements to public access, the new lease would also include additional rent and lease terms that are more consistent with the terms of other leases for property in the park, such as improved insurance requirements and provisions to restore the premises in the event of a casualty. As you know, we've begun providing updates on lease negotiations for board members for some time, and we will shortly share the full draft proposed lease with the directors. As part of the significant action process, the trust will post the proposed lease and details about the public comment period on the park's website. The Hudson River Park Act requires that the trust provide at least a 60-day period to receive comments. We are looking forward to hearing from the public once we begin the public process. And now it's time for some acknowledgements. I'd like to congratulate our friend Jeffrey LaFrancois, who is now the new chair of Community Board 4. Jeffrey is not able to be here today, so he's not hearing this in person, but we'll give him a shout out anyway. This means, of course, that Lowell Kern is no longer wearing his CB4 hat, but we appreciate him for always being available to us when he was the CB4 chair as well.
Noreen, just to
Yeah.
clarify, I am still a member of CB4 and still a member of the Waterfront Parks and Environment Committee.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yes, thank you. Important. The longtime chair of Hudson River Park Friends, Mike Novogratz, has also stepped down from that position, but we thank him for his personal commitment to so many aspects of the park. Mike brought formidable intellectual capacity, energy, leadership, and personal philanthropy to his role as chair, and we're so grateful to him for his support. We also thank him for persuading Diana Taylor to be the new chair of Friends. Diana, of course, knows the park inside and out, and I, for one, am looking forward to working with her in this newest chapter of her sustained involvement and commitment to the park. And last, since our last meeting, our park community lost two of the park's leading advocates, Bob Trent-Lyon and Ed Kirkland. Bob and Ed were both residents of Chelsea for decades, and both also fought for decades for the park's creation and betterment. I will miss them both personally, and I know many of you here will as well. There are plans afoot to celebrate and honor them, hopefully in the park sometime this spring, and I'll keep you all informed about that. And unless anyone has additional questions or comments, that's my report.
Questions, comments? Lots going on, which is great to see. Okay, so I will now ask Jeffrey LaFrancois to present the advisory council. Jeffrey, congratulations for and thank you for your service.
So Jeffrey isn't here tonight. He had a scheduling snafu that he wasn't aware of. So he has asked me to read his advisory council report since I'm here giving my report anyway.
Great,
so
thank you, Connie.
Just close your eyes and pretend for a minute. The advisory council had its last meeting on Tuesday, January 18, where it received a presentation regarding the Chelsea Piers lease renewal negotiations, and they appreciated being made aware in advance of the significant action process formally beginning. The advisory council supports the general framework of the negotiations and recognizes that Chelsea Piers is the biggest rent-paying tenant in the park and how important that is. Chelsea Piers is also a valued community resource and is well-liked by the community. However, given the advisory council's repeated requests for significant greenway improvements and an expansion of the greenway itself, it was disappointed to learn that no greenway improvements or expansions at this point were part of the lease negotiations. Engineering analyses aside, given the request by numerous peer tenants at the recent Community Board 4 meeting for greater city bike access in and around Chelsea Piers, to not make any improvements to the greenway in this area is unfortunate. Once the significant action process begins, the advisory council will determine whether to take a formal position on the lease. In the general topic of discussion for the meeting was city bike stations in and around the park. Currently, only 2 city bike docks are on the park side of Route 9A, one at Pier 79 and one at Pier 40. New York City DOT recently presented plans for city bike infill stations to the community boards along the park, and all of the relevant community board committees wondered how many more stations could be placed in and immediately adjacent or across from the park. The advisory council had no recommendation or conclusion, and like most issues inside Hudson River Park, it's complicated, and for good reason. City bikes and cycling in general will be an ongoing discussion for the advisory council at meetings coming up. The membership committee is reviewing advisory council attendance records and has put out a call for new members. Elections are in March and a new term begins in April per the most recent update of the bylaws. The next advisory council meetings are scheduled for February 8th and March 8th of 2022. And normally I would ask if there are any questions, but since I can't give you any answers, I will forgo that.
Okay, thank you, Connie. On behalf of Jeffrey, any comments that we want to take back to Jeffrey? Okay, then I'm going to turn to Connie in her own capacity to present on behalf of the Hudson River Park Friends.
Thank you. Friends, as Noreen mentioned, elected a new chair at our last Board of Directors meeting last week. Diana Taylor will replace Mike Novogratz as chair for a 3-year term ending January 31st of 2025. And she joined us this morning for our all-staff meeting to get to know everybody at Friends and to talk about priorities for the coming year. We also elected a new board member, Larry Keeglin, who has a background as a choreographer and dancer and an interest in philanthropy in the arts, performing arts, and culture. And we're hoping to work closely with him and some of the public program staff at the Trust to look at opportunities for funding for things like the annual dance festival. Right now, we're preparing our budget for 2022 also. Revenue-wise, we're at about 80% of our pre-COVID fundraising level. So we anticipate that over this next fiscal year coming up, we'll be able to get all the way back to where we were prior to the pandemic, provided that COVID does not experience a resurgence in severity equal to what we saw last year. Based on that assumption, we're going to be searching for a major donor officer, which is something we've never had at Friends, and for an entry-level staff person to work on our volunteer program with us. We've been managing up until now with only one staff person dedicated to that program and lots of help from the horticulture staff at the Trust, but it has now outgrown the capacity of a single individual to handle, and we expect continued growth in the future. Friends has had to postpone our annual playground committee luncheon, which was to be tomorrow, to March 4th because of the surge in recent COVID cases. Hopefully by March, things will have died down to the point that we'll be able to carry out the event, which is usually attended by 300 people and brings in revenue of about $250,000. We'll be highlighting the environmental education programs that serve New York's K through 12 city school students as part of that program. Finally, we completed our capital fundraising campaign, as was mentioned, for Pier 26, and we're excited to see a groundbreaking in the first half of 2022, I hope. And I want to acknowledge Mike Novogratz, our former chair, for his $1.3 million matching gift, which helped us cross the finish line, and also for our former City Council Speaker, Corey Johnson, who allocated $1 million for this project before leaving office. And we thank him very, very much for that. And that's my report.
Great. Any questions or comments for Connie? So very promising. Okay, is there any further business? Thank you, Connie, for all that you do. Is there any further business before we go into executive session? Hearing none, I will request that the directors move into executive session to discuss real estate negotiations, particularly Chelsea Piers, the Chelsea Piers lease, and that we adjourn the public portion of the meeting. So may I please have a motion to move into executive session and adjourn the public portion of today's meeting?
So moved.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is approved. I should note the executive session will not include any action items for approval by the directors. Okay, Chris, you sent around something, so you want us to go into